Oh boy, we got trouble in Syria. President Obama had said that using chemical weapons was a red line. Here is Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel.
We cannot confirm the origin of these weapons, but we do believe that any use of chemical weapons in Syria would very likely have been originated with the Assad regime. As the letter states, the President has made it clear that the use of chemical weapons or the transfer of such weapons to terrorist groups would be unacceptable.
Unacceptable. What does that mean? Does that mean we're going to war? Well, let's bring you more facts here. Now, it turns out John Kerry, our Secretary of State, is saying that it appears that chemical weapons were used twice. We believe, but as Chuck Hagel alluded to there, we're not positive that it was the Assad regime, and we might be partly saying that because we don't really want to go to war. First of all, President Obama sent a letter through his legislative director, Miguel Rodriguez. It says, our intelligence community does assess with varying degrees of confidence that the Syrian regime has used chemical weapons on a small scale in Syria, specifically the chemical agent sarin. Now, Chuck Hagel, Defense Secretary, you just heard him there. He also said use of chemical weapons violates every convention of warfare. So obviously it's a very serious issue. President Obama has called it a game changer. A game changer obviously is a very important terminology given that right now the game we're playing is not going to war. The game we might be playing soon is going to war. He also said the use or transfer of such weapons in Syria was a red line for the United States. Those are strong words, hard to walk back. Now, also in that letter sent by Miguel Rodriguez, speaking for President Obama, because the president takes this issue so seriously, we have an obligation to fully investigate any and all evidence of chemical weapons within Syria. There we go. There's the brakes. So, the red line, you better not do it or you did it. Damn it. We hadn't planned on that. So now, well, let's wait a minute now. First of all, let's investigate. Our initial investigation indicates that there is no oil in Syria. Now, when there was oil in Iraq, they had the weapons, they didn't have the weapons. In Libya, he was crushing his own people. Muammar Gaddafi was a dictator. Now, of course, we had business deals with him before the rebellion began, and he was a dictator for 40 some odd years at that point. But he's got oil. And then when he was crushing his own people, we went in. Now, I was in favor of that because I wanted to send a message that you can't do this to your own people if you're a brutal dictator. Now, the problem is that as soon as we set that message, and that's why I was in favor of the Persian Gulf War, I really do believe in precedent. I really do. I think it's important. And if you stick with it, it can work. But the problem is every time we send a message, we immediately send a counter message that is directly opposite of that. So, for example, in the first Persian Gulf War, we said, hey, listen, you cannot invade a sovereign country that did not attack you. That's what Saddam Hussein did. He crossed the border to Kuwait, was in Kuwait, and we had to go and remove that. Now, we didn't remove Saddam. We just brought Kuwait back to its original rulers, unfortunately, but the people who, of course, were in charge of the country. So that was a good precedent to set. It could bring stability, because the next time somebody thinks, hey, I'm going to conquer the country next to me, they think, or maybe the Americans come and kick my ass. So I should think twice about it. And the whole world, really, because that was a worldwide operation. Now, unfortunately, right after that, we destroyed that precedent by attacking Iraq under George W. Bush. Iraq didn't attack us. It had nothing to do with 9/11. It didn't even have weapons of mass destruction. There was no justification whatsoever. Even if it had WMDs, there's still no justification. France has WMDs. Should we invade them? Saddam was no threat to us, and they could never prove that, and he did not attack us. So the precedent set by George H.W. Bush was destroyed by George W. Bush. Now, in Libya, we set the precedent, if you're a dictator and you're going after your own people and massacring them, we're going to come to get you. Great, I was in favor of that. And then Bashar Assad does it in Syria, and we go, well, on the other hand, we're a little tired of all the wars, and Syria has no oil, so good luck to you folks. Now, it's not a matter of taking their oil. It's much more complicated than that. See, if there is a lot of people making money in a certain country, as there was in Libya. Now, some people had contracts in that country and they wanted to protect them. Some, like France, did not have a lot of oil contracts in Libya, and they were looking forward to getting some. Keep it real. Now, France, I thought, did a great job in Libya, but that was a very realistic part of their equation. So now in Syria, not a lot of people are making money, so they're like, take it or leave it. Now, in this case, if we can send the message that crossing that red line is unacceptable, I would be in favor of it. The problem, of course, is we cross our own red lines. The amount of birth defects in Fallujah and in Basra are about 20 times the size of the birth defects after Hiroshima and Nagasaki nuclear bombs. Why? We use white phosphorus and we use depleted uranium. Those are chemicals and they happen to be in weapon form. So, God, I wish our government wasn't full of hypocrisy, because I believe that America could be great. It could be a great example, and it has been in the past. When we set up the United Nations, the Marshall Plan, the idea of spreading human rights and democracy throughout the world. But God, we violate our own red lines so often. Now, finally, a senior defense official said the White House letter was not an automatic trigger for policy decisions on the use of military force. In other words, what they're saying is, yeah, we said we'd go to war, but we're not quite so sure. It's not just the oil situation, it's not just the financial situation. Bashar al-Assad didn't cause too much trouble for Israel. We didn't really like him, but we could tolerate him. Now, the people who are fighting him, we're not so sure. Some of them could be good guys, some of them could be bad guys. Do we really want him in charge? We don't know, and hence no action whatsoever. Now, this is a very hard one to predict. Will we actually start to take military action like using our Air Force? Unclear. Should we? Oof, that's a tough question. If we were going to continue to do the right things going forward, if we were not going to be hypocritical, then I would say yes. It's a good example and a good precedent to set, and that is a good red line to have, that every time somebody thinks about pushing a button on chemical, biological, or nuclear weapons, that they think twice. Unfortunately, all too often we have violated those same precedents that we set almost immediately thereafter. So it becomes a much harder question. But if he is allowed to use chemical weapons, he's got a hell of a lot more of them, and he might start to use them more and more, knowing that there are no consequences. Overall, if I was the president, I would think that I would very seriously consider starting to bring our air power into there. No troops on the ground. There's plenty of rebel fighters within Syria. Try to pick the good guys according to our definition. Obviously, we have to be concerned about our own national security and our own interests. There's no question about that. But air power is incredibly determinative oftentimes in war. Not always, but look at what it did in Libya, and it gave the rebels an enormous advantage. Given that he seems to have crossed the red line here in Syria, I would move probably air power to go against Bashar al-Assad. But again, that's with the big if we can continue to hold that precedent and not so be so hypocritical with the rest of our actions.